recruiting wasn't actually the problem. It was a symptom of a greater problem. The whole recruiting system is just broken. People who are the best are really never looking for a job. HR doesn't know what professional headhunting is. It's the company's fault. It's the fault that somebody in human resources is managing them rather than an expert or professional headhunter. Salespeople, turnover in sales is your biggest loss in ROI.
This week, we continue our theme on talent acquisition, talent retention, and talent development. And we speak with author Carol Schultz. She's the author of Powered by People, a book that centers on the concept of a talent-centered organization. And so I pursue that theme and that idea with her in this conversation. Enjoy. Tell me about your podcast.
Well, it's called Authentically Successful Founders and CXOs on the Journey from Startup to Success. I primarily interview founders and CEOs. On an occasion, I'll interview, like I interviewed one CHRO, maybe a CFO, maybe I think once a chief revenue officer, but mostly it's founders and CEOs, like 99.5% probably, I would say. So it's really about their journey, right? So because I work with primarily small businesses, I'm in the SMB space, mistakes for them are exponentially more mission critical that they're going to go under. Or lose all their venture capitalist money or whatever. I think it's really important for people to learn and find out what it is, what you need to know to build a company. And even a lot of people I interview are making mistakes, right? I interviewed somebody who said they were customer centric. Well, you can't be customer centric if you're not talent centric. People don't understand that. And that's really, what I'm doing is, as I know we're going to talk about with the book, is it's an epiphany I had in 2008. I got out of bed. I think this story is in my book. I got out of bed one morning in 2008 and could not emotionally make the trip to my office down the hall and around the corner. And I was still doing full-time, professional search as a professional headhunter. I was coaching. I started my coaching training in 1998. And like I said, there was something wrong, not necessarily about the coaching industry at that point. I think there is now, but the whole recruiting system is just broken. It doesn't work. And it's been exacerbated by the internet. The internet's done a lot of great stuff, just like social media, but I also believe it's done more harm than good in many ways. So I had a hypothesis that recruiting wasn't actually the problem. It was a symptom of a greater problem with companies. And I interviewed, I don't even know, countless people. I'd been in the search industry for 16 years at that point. And I interviewed people from individual contributors all the way up the food chain to, heads of sales, third line sales managers, depending on the size of the company, right? And really the hypothesis that I had that the problem is at the executive level. The questions that I asked and the answers that I got led me to say, yep, I was right about this. And what that is if the executive team has gaps in alignment, so they're not fully aligned, that's going to trickle down throughout the entire organization. It's going to trickle down into how they hire, how they retain, how they do any training and development, which many of them don't do, leadership development, any of those types of things. And it's often as just simple as, in my discovery meetings, I ask 7 questions. I ask about each individual about the vision for the company. Do I get the same answer? I ask about them to define the culture. Do I get generally the same answer? I ask about what department or function in the company they think is the most important to its success. I see what answers I get. And then there's some other things that I ask as well. And this just tells me where the gaps are in alignment, right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, are you a 0, meaning you're not remotely aligned, to a 10, you don't need me. Nobody needs me. They can continue doing business the way they're doing it. It's only the most, I would say, self-aware founders and CEOs that hire me. The rest are like, oh, we don't have time or whatever that is. Then once we start fixing those problems, closing those gaps, I should say, then and only then can I build them a talent strategy to support the work that we've done.
Yeah.
That was the epiphany.
Let me dig into one piece of that, because you give some short vignettes about the conversations, right?
Yep.
The actual engagement with these different senior level stakeholders. I was assuming, but I couldn't tell, and I wanted to ask you, when you say you're seeing misalignment, I would expect that a CHRO, a CTO, a CEO, a CFO that are aligned are still going to place the emphasis a little different. Like, that's going to sound like a banjo, a guitar, a drum set, and a bass, all in tune and all in rhythm, but they are not going to sound the same.
Yep.
So my presumption was you're hearing slightly different emphasis, but alignment. Is that right? Or am I actually being kind of too generous there? And what you're looking for is, no, I want to hear the same words.
I don't need to hear the same words. Yeah. You're right. Okay. I need to hear the same message. I mean, when you ask a company what its vision is, I should get the same words if they're clear about it.
Yeah.
I should. Okay.
They should be able to remember it because it's written in the lobby.
Well, right. Exactly. So from that standpoint, yes, I should get the same words. Okay. From all the other questions I ask, I should get the same message. Because everybody, I mean, if everybody's clear on what our culture is, or if the CEO has done a really good job at making it clear to the team what that message is, then I should pretty much hear some of the same words as well. Right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I could hear, I just assume actually you're probably a well-schooled student of strategy, because I could hear in the way that you were talking about that obviously something like a talent strategy and a sales strategy have to coexist inside an organization, but they had better be in harmony, or else there's going to be some tragedy.
Well, yeah, some tragedy, yeah, that's for sure. Financial tragedy, likely. That's true. But whether it's a sales strategy, a talent strategy, or, customer success usually, lies, of course, within sales. But whatever it is, even an engineering strategy, right? But what people don't think of is they think recruiting is their problem. Recruiting is a symptom of this greater problem of misalignment. And it's hard to get people to really get that, right? I mean, I write a lot, I'm on a lot of interviews. It's disruptive, and people rely on, and they should never do this, they rely on human resources. Talent strategy has no business living underneath human resources. I'm not going to go into the whole long story about that. You can read my article in Fast Company from January of this year. But at a high level, human resources people, I'd say probably 98%, this isn't scientific, it's just been my own research, they've never recruited. And if they have, they certainly weren't a professional recruiter, a professional headhunter like I am. I was trained in the olden days, right? We had fax machines back then. Now emails made it a whole lot easier to send stuff back and forth. But the reality is the internet made companies lazy. And it made them think, oh, look, we have all these, Indeeds. Well, there wasn't Indeed back then, but, all these job sites, right? Well, all those are is fancier want ads. Instead of having a 1x2 inch ad, you now have, a whole page of an ad.
Yeah.
And who, of course, is looking at the want ads?
They're all the wrong folks.
Well, people who need a job.
Yeah.
Right. The people who are the best are really never looking for a job. I hate to use the word never, but I'd say it's pretty close. They're just never looking for a job. You have to go out and headhunt them. That's what we have lost with the rise of the internet, laziness. and companies hire kids.
There's another constituency in that map of characters, that sort of recipe or configuration that you're not exactly merciful to in the book. I'll read a quote, see if you can spot the author.
Oh yeah.
Most of the internal recruiters I've met should be fired, unquote.
Yeah. That would be oh, me. Yeah. Well, yeah, I do believe that. As I will put a little notice here that it's very early in the morning for me, and people were setting off fireworks till almost 10:30 at night when I go to bed around 9, because it was our nation's you're an American, it sounds like. So, it was the 4th of July here yesterday.
I'm a Canadian, but I can appreciate it. I've got a story.
But the 4th of July here, our Independence Day here in this country. So I had to get out of bed, put clothes on, and walk down the street to find out who was somebody was setting off like bombs. My animals were scared to death. So I'm going to just put off that little notice if I'm not as sharp as I might normally be. But I do believe most of the internal recruiters should be fired. But who's responsible for that ultimately? It's because they put recruiting under HR, and HR doesn't know what professional headhunting is. Don't send me hate mail. Read my article and start learning to make things different, is what I say. So if you think of, Kevin, if you think of a spoked wheel, right? And talent strategy is the hub of that wheel. If all those spokes aren't tight to the rim, the wheel won't roll well. That doesn't make your talent department the most important department, because I believe there is no most important department. Without everybody's contributions, the company can't function. You're always going to have these gaps and these issues. But talent strategy is at the hub. And if you don't have the proper strategy, those spokes aren't going to be tight to the rim. The wheel won't roll.
Okay, so I think I should put the challenge out to you, because you address it a bit, but it's going to be hovering in people's minds. A talent-centric organization. Well, we've heard fill in the blank centric organization configuration before. A values-centric organization. This is a leadership-centric organization. Favorite of all. This is a client-centered organization. More mercenary. This is a sales-centered organization, or you hear that about a business unit, right? So, Carol, make the case for us. Why should talent-centric beat out something like values-centric or client-centric?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kevin, because without a focus on your people, you can't have any of the other things you just mentioned. It won't work. I mean, to be customer centric, don't you have to have the right people in place that know how to make a focus on your customers?
Yeah.
For all of these things, you have to have the right people in place. And that's not easy. I mean, everybody wants to, everybody bitches and moans about, oh, we can't find people. We can't find the right people. I interviewed somebody for my podcast, really, really amazing CEO. And, he was at the end, after we were done recording, I asked him a little bit about because he asks the right questions in the interviews. I made him walk through it with me. And I was incredibly impressed with how much he knew about questions to ask and how to find. I said, well, how are you finding your people? He says, well, we post jobs. I said, well, no wonder. You're asking all the right questions, but you're not asking them to the right people. You have to go out and find those people. So this is.
So what's some, when you speak about this, I get it a little in the book, but I actually get it more in your voice. There's a little bit of there's a little bit of a like voice crying in the wilderness, right? This is like a craftsman from a bygone era. You're like, they don't make barrels like they used to. If only
Right.
they could get a Cooper to make a barrel like they used to. You like,
Yeah,
there were
right.
halcyon glory days when this was done right. So if I've got that right, take us back. What were some of the techniques, or at least like the ethos of these folks who used to do this well?
Well, they're going to be probably over 50,
Mhm,
or they'll have been trained by somebody,
mhm.
right? That is. So, back in the day, I'm dating myself here a little bit. As I said, when I started in the business, there was faxes. There was no such thing as the internet. Okay. What the internet has done is it's made people easier to find. Source. All the rest of it's the same. Okay. So you had to get on the phone with people and talk to them. You had to know how to engage somebody in a conversation. You had to know how to get somebody to actually want to have a conversation with you. Right. I've had people over the years say to me, there's two things. This is not me patting myself on the back, but these are important to know. I've had people say to me, Carol, I've told you things I've never told a recruiter before. That's one. Now, when somebody said that to me in the past, not only would I thank them, because that's a huge acknowledgement, right? But the reason for that, and I would share this with them, is because I'm not asking questions in order to, get information. Yes, that's part of the job, but that's also can be seen as manipulative.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can find out to just, right? I'm asking questions because I'm actually have a genuine interest in human beings, which is what makes me a great coach also, right? From the training I have. But that's the first thing. And the second thing is knowing how to get someone to talk to me. I've had people say to me, I want you to know, didn't happen very often, but it did happen from time to time, where somebody would say, I've never taken a call from a recruiter before until you. And it was how you reached out to me. That's what people don't know how to do anymore, those things, especially internal recruiters. Now, that said, I know some internal recruiters, people that, like one guy that I trained long ago. He's got a wife, he's got 3 kids. He just got tired of the grind, because back then we were all in contingent recruiting. I moved to retain many years ago. And it's a grind, man, for a million reasons that we don't have time to talk about here. Probably.
Yes.
That's probably for a whole other book, but there are some good internal recruiters that I know. Okay. But I would say the vast majority aren't, because companies hire kids and put them in front of a computer and say, here, be a recruiter. I'll see people call them senior recruiters with maybe 3 years experience. That's not possible. Where did you learn how to do anything? Where did you learn how to, I had a conversation with a friend of mine's daughter who used to be in recruiting, and I was over at their house, and her daughter said to me, oh, we do the same thing. And I'm like, what agency do you work for? And she goes, oh, no, I work for such and such company. I think they're in metals and mining, which is big out here in Colorado. And I said, oh, well, no, we don't do the same thing. You're a corporate recruiter. That's not the same thing as agency work. It's very different. And she says, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, let me paint 2 pictures for you. I said, when I say agency, I'm also meaning retained versus contingent. I said, well, let me ask you this. When you have a new job to work on, a new job opening, are you in there actually doing a kickoff meeting with the stakeholders, asking the questions, writing the position description, working alongside of the prime stakeholder to get that position description right? Or are they handing it to you? No, they're handing it to me. I said, okay, so that's one thing that separates us. That makes you the order filler, right? There are things called, and I think this is in the book, agents of management, consultants to management. That makes her an agent of management. right? Rather than a consultant to management. I said,
Right.
the second thing is you start working on that job order. Like, what's the first thing you do? Well, I go to LinkedIn and start doing search. Yeah, LinkedIn's a massive database, but LinkedIn's not the only place. I hate to break the news to you. There's other places to go source people. You know, whether it be Zoom info. I mean, there's massive databases all over the place. And you need to use more than LinkedIn, right? So that's another thing. You can't just rely. LinkedIn wants, or I should say, Microsoft wants you to think that LinkedIn is the panacea. I call bullshit on that. Okay. It's not. But that's what they want. You know, that's what they want. And I'm going to, you know, the nation of sheep, so to speak, to think.
Yes.
So I said, that's great. She goes, and I network around and so on and so forth. I said, okay, great. Excuse me. What's the next thing you do? How do you reach out to people? Well, I send them in mails. I said, okay, ding, ding, ding. That's the second reason that has us be very, very different. She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, why aren't you picking up the phone and calling people? And she said to me, and I quote, well, how do you get their phone numbers? Now, the point of that is to not make this young woman look bad. It's not her responsibility that nobody trained her.
Yeah.
It's not. It's the company's fault. This is why I say that the vast majority of corporate recruiters just suck. And it's not their fault. It's the company's fault. It's the fault that somebody in human resources is managing them rather than an expert or professional headhunter. That's whose fault it is.
Or what about this, Carol? What, as a counter offer to the two better employers, what about a business head? So do you feel still some concern if a business unit head, let's say that the head of sales is that person's boss, because that head of sales actually doesn't know the craft? Or is that fine because the head of sales is actually directly connected to what they need the talent to look like?
Right. That's a great question. So my belief is there should be a chief talent officer, so a second CTO, so to speak, that reports directly to the CEO. If your talent is done right and it is the hub of the company, why in the world would you want it reporting to anybody else but you as the CEO? So, you know, it's kind of like because great professional headhunting, Kevin, is sales.
Yeah.
Period. It's sales. You have to know how to engage somebody in a conversation, right? Sales. You have to know how to ask questions. Sales. You have to know how to find out what their problems are. Asking questions. Sales, right? I could go on. And I use this example in this article I mentioned from Fast Company. If talent is sales, I guess that means now your sales organization should report to human resources.
Oh yeah.
They'd look at that and go, "Oh no." See, it's a way of thinking. And you know, I have to blame the CEO because the CEO doesn't understand. That's where I say only self-aware CEOs, those who are curious and want to really find out what is the problem? Why are we having this issue? When I get on the phone before anybody even hires me, all I'm doing is asking questions, just like any professional salesperson, to find out what they think their problem is and why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me make a lateral jump. There's a couple things. One of the things that happened for me as I read the book is I found that the things I really wanted to pick you up on didn't have some kind of a beautiful flow like one of your gorgeous Colorado rivers. Rather, it was like just a bit here, and then I was like, there is no segue, so just put up with a bit of lateral jumping.
Sure, no problem.
Recruitment, succession, development, retention.
Right.
Okay, there's plenty of frameworks out there in the business world, et cetera, but these don't come out of nowhere. These are they almost seem like like Plato's like original elements or the periodic table of elements. Like you're not going to break these down further. If you cut these apart, things stop working properly. So you've got these 4 core pillars.
Yeah.
I'll repeat them again because not for you, but for folks who will catch this. Recruitment, then succession, by which we don't mean CEO replacement plans.
Right. And I mentioned that. Yep.
Yep. Development, which is more my world. So I'll jump in there a little bit with you. Retention. Okay. There is some buzz and there's some hackneyed use of all of those terms. There's misuse, there's accurate use, there's overuse of all four of those terms in various ways. So can we get the Carol Schultz rundown of why those four?
Because remember when I told you, Kevin, that I had all these conversations back in 2008 and 2009. I was having a conversation. This story's in the book. And I won't tell you who I can't tell you who the company he was with was. Let's just say it's a, multi-billion-dollar tech firm that everyone listening to this would know if they know technology. He was with them for over 20 years. I can't remember how long he'd been with them at that point. High level guy. I'd known him my whole career. And you may remember reading this. He and I were just talking. I was talking to him about this new process I built and so on and so forth. And in that conversation, I said to him, well, and this company hires mostly contract recruiters. That's a lot of who they use, right? And that's a whole other issue that I have with not that it's a bad thing, and we can talk about that if you want to, contract recruiters. But ultimately, I said to him, well, how do you know, and this guy's a sales guy, right? How do you know what you want in your sales, your field sales guys? And he says to me, well, we're a blank company. We know what we want. And I said to him again, and I quote, how do you know that person wants to come work for company? Crickets. I don't remember how much time went by of silence. And he finally says to me, the pregnant pause is, all great salespeople know when to shut their mouth, right? And he says, I don't know. That's a really good question. That right there really confirmed everything I was thinking about. And that was in early 2009. And I thought that's exactly part of the problem, right? So when you think of recruitment, you have to think of, and I have been preaching this now since my book came out 13 months ago. Okay. I mean, preaching loud. I write articles about it. I talk about it on interviews. I do LinkedIn posts about stuff like that. And I noticed somebody who, I again won't say who it is, his entire claim to fame that he's a certain company's former CHRO, their first one. That's his entire claim to fame. He's ridden on those coattails. And all of a sudden I noticed several months after I started preaching that he starts posting stuff like that. And I said, oh, I see you've been reading my stuff. That's great to see, right? He didn't come up with this idea. I guarantee it. We've been connected for a long time. And, but what they say is, copying somebody is the greatest form of flattery, right? So companies have to start learning, and I think they are. I've been preaching it loudly enough, and I know other people have seen it and are preaching it as well. They have to start asking people in the recruitment stage, right? What do you need, right? So when you hire a field sales guy, how long do you want that guy to stay with you, or gal? I'm using guy, loosely. Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Well, if he's had a job every year and a half, that might be a concern. Doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily not interview him, but it does mean you better be asking really good questions. Is it the companies really that were the problem, or was this individual the problem? Do they not, does something go south and they just quit? And what a great recruiter does is they just, like I said, I'm not asking in order to eliminate somebody or put them forward. I'm asking the question because I want to learn about them. It's in my best interest as a professional headhunter, or it's in your best interest for your company to make sure you hire somebody that's going to stay with you for the next 3 to 5 years, if that's in fact what you want. Salespeople, turnover in sales is your biggest loss in ROI. I had a buddy of mine say once, he goes, I figure for every sales guy turnover cost me $2 million. I built a spreadsheet to figure it out.
Yeah,
put those numbers
this
in.
is a wicked segment of the book. So for those who are skimmers,
Yeah.
and you pick up Carol's book, that particular little vignette's quite compelling.
Yeah, thank you.
It's like bar envelope math, but it makes the case in a pretty punchy way.
Yeah. Well, and it just made sense to me. I started thinking about it, right? And I started thinking, the problem is nobody's looking at what their losses are when they turn over a 200% a quota guy.
Yeah.
Or 150% a quota guy. So I started putting numbers. You've got hard numbers, commissions and salary and, insurance and stuff like that. And then you've got opportunity costs. That guy leaves and you don't replace him for 6 months. And then it takes the next guy 3 months to get up to speed. That's 9 lost months of revenue on a guy that's been producing 200% of quota.
Yes.
So you have to look at those opportunity costs. And nobody ever looks at any of that. They just go on and they don't think about it. So from the recruitment standpoint, you must ask what people need. It's not always just about the money. It's never about the money only. For some people, listen, we all need money to make a living and to live, right? And, the gal that owned my nail salon, who I adore, just sold her business. She got a baby at home. She probably wants to have another baby. And she says, I was willing to sell the business. And although I'll be making a little less money now, that's okay with me. She's getting ready to go on vacation for 2 weeks. She has trouble doing that when she owns the salon, right? It's the same thing. So some people will say, well, for this, I'm willing to trade for that. But you don't know unless you ask, Kevin. You just don't. So that's the recruitment piece. Do you have any questions about that before I go on to succession?
No.
Okay. Succession beyond the C-suite, as you mentioned. Succession is not just a C-suite. It's you thinking, okay, we should probably be interviewing, even if we don't need a new field sales guy, we should probably interview a star and get him on the bench. What is, so forgive me that I'm not a great fan of baseball. So hopefully this analogy will work, but you've got what do you have? You've got the guy that's at bat, on deck. And what's the one behind that in the pit or whatever?
Carol, you picked the wrong interviewer. You're further ahead on baseball by like triple as I will ever be. So
but
just
that's
go
what
ahead
it is. So you've got the guy at bat, and then you've got the guy that's on deck, who's the guy that's like practicing his swing while the next guy's up at bat. And then you've got the guy that's in the dugout that would be the next guy to come up. There's a word for it. I don't know. You must look at your hiring, your talent the same way. Okay, not just the guy that's on the bench in football, right? Here's your number 1 quarterback, then you've got your number 2, your number 3, your number 4 quarterback, right, on the bench. So we'll use that analogy. Maybe you know a little bit more about American football, so or Canadian football. I know you have a Canadian football league, and so it's the same thing. You must prepare your bench. That's succession. Even if you're not going to use quarterback 2, 3, or 4. In the game. But if you have to, they sure shit better be ready to take over for your QB1. Okay. All right. That way, even if that great sales guy you just interviewed, you don't have a place for him right now, he goes off to another company, you don't want to have to necessarily pull him out a year later, but you know what? You're going to pick up the phone. You're going to call him. Say, I know you've taken a new job. But we really loved you, and we did at least want to throw it out there if there's still interest. You know what? There's pros and cons of that, because then, would they do the same thing to you if somebody called them?
There's something that you're saying here too, which just, give me your guidance here, because I've managed reasonably large org charts myself. And we've just had 2 other interviews with authors who are talking about either talent attraction, talent retention. And there's this language like time to fill and so forth, right? And by instinct, I get a little bit of some itchy red spots on my skin when I hear that, because I think like,
I know
that has the resonance in my ear of like speed to close on certain sales. I'm like, speed to close is okay at a certain junior level of sales, but if you're talking large structural enterprise deals, it's like,
right.
let's put speed on the shelf for a sec, guys, and make sure we like cement this thing into the foundation
Yeah.
properly. And what do you make of that? So with succession, I hear a subtext, which is you might have a 2-3 year courtship with some folks where they're not ready to leave their post.
That's right.
But like you can't start it 1 week before they are ready to leave their post. What do you make of that? Am I onto a thing, or am I?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, this whole time to fill thing, this is what it exists both in corporate, but it also exists in agency. Okay. Not everywhere in agency. That's one of the big, I don't know whose books those were and what their deal is, but when I see, and I'll come back to answering this question, when I see somebody focusing too much on one area, that is a red flag for me. Because it's like I said, it is not that simple. Buddy of mine used to say to me, if sales was easy, they'd give a dog a note. Isn't that awesome? Right? And I've used that ever since. That's fantastic. So ultimately, time to fill is used as a sales tool to whoever's hiring you. Right? How long is this going to take?
Yeah.
Well, it should take, depending on the level, it could take 45 days, it could take 60 days, it could take 90 days. And, when your client then says, oh no, it's an emergency, we need them in less time. There's two things you can do. You can say to the client, sorry, I can't take on the search for you because what you're asking for is unrealistic. Always better to underpromise and overdeliver than the other way. Or you can say to them, I'm sorry, why did you not have a succession plan in place for this? Right? If you have a succession plan in place, it really negates all these time to fill things, because then you've got a bench of people to call. That's still going to take a little time. They may not be ready to leave their job, but you've had conversations with them. This buddy of mine that I was, that when I said, somebody I trained many, many years ago, he's always said when he moved into corporate, he goes, because he knows what a professional headhunter is. That's what he is. And that's what he told me one day. He goes, yeah, I'm always talking to people, thinking about for the future. They may not be ready. I mean, that's how I was. That's how what I taught him to do back in the 90s. Does that answer your question? Or am I missing something?
No, that's exactly right. I guess, look, our particular place where Sage lives is really on the next one, which is development. Okay. And when we focus there, you end up looking upstream and downstream and kind of, in the eddy, let's say, to continue the stream metaphor, for the speed of business, the organic speed of how people grow inside a company, right? So if it's like, look, I got to ram another 14 guys into this team, and then I need somebody to get in here and train them up real quick, because then what? Because they're going to leave anytime soon because we turn them over in 18 months. Like this is a frenetic, like fever dream going on in your team right now. And it is actually a dangerous thing to be a part of if you're looking at how people teach and learn, because people don't teach and learn at speed very well, and I don't think they get recruited at speed very well. Yeah. They don't leave at speed very well. There's a way to leave well and not. So that's the lens that I see it through. So there wasn't more that I was looking for. I'm just seeing there's a cascade. If the recruiting is done under a frenetic rush, there's a bunch of stuff downstream of that inevitably will suffer. Is going to be, that's right, a chaotic rush as well.
Yeah. So development, again, that's your area of expertise. And when I think of development, I'm thinking of leadership development and employee development. maybe you do as well. I mean, is that how you look at things?
A little differently. So,
Mhm.
so my obsession is cultures of learning and the concept of teaching and learning in a workplace.
Yeah, I
So
love that.
I like to get down to uh, getting an answer, Carol, to the question, what is a workplace? Because the truth is, like, people can teach and learn like crazy. I mean,
Mhm.
you teach and learn down at church, you teach and learn down at the badminton club, you taught and learned when you
Right.
were in grade 9.
Mhm.
So it's like, but what's a workplace? Because nobody's getting paid at the badminton club, and
Mhm.
nobody's writing up your like your credential and the matriculation that you're
Mhm.
going through as a
Mhm.
professional down at church. And like the workplace is different. It is a different spot.
Right.
And that's what my team and I are thinking about, like what is really going on there, because there's a lot of
Mhm.
lazy habits in that segment, this development segment, that would be equivalent to what you're saying around junior in-house recruiters.
Mhm.
Think about the tears that I cry on my pillow at night about junior in-house trainers.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can only imagine. Right. So that's a really fabulous way to look at development. I just love that. But, in general, the reason I say development's part of it, regardless of, your take on it or my take on it, which I think are not dissimilar. I really like the way you're looking at it, is that you have to develop your people.
Yeah.
That's part. So by the way, that's part of your retention strategy. It's separate. I mentioned recruitment, retention, development, and retention, but development it's sort of a subhead of your retention strategy. I mean, it is.
Couldn't
But I
agree
want
more.
people to think about all those things that are important, right? So I always mention that is, development is like retention junior, right? And everybody wants something different. It's not about only training your leaders. I mean, yes, you need to train your leaders. You need to develop them. But what does that mean? It means teaching them how to communicate
Mhm.
effectively to their subordinates. And oh, by the way, and this is something I learned in discovery, is that how, you've got 5 people reporting to you, let's say, right? And oh, by the way, we're not all Gen Z, or we're not all Gen X, we're not all millennials. Okay. I communicate differently than somebody in Gen Z,
Mhm.
more than likely, because they grew up with technology. I didn't.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean I haven't learned to use technology. I sit in front of a computer all day.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who calls me all the time when she has trouble with her technology. Carol, what do I need to do about this? Okay. I'm not a techie by any means, but I know how to use technology. And my executive assistant, who is the one who reached out on my behalf when you all reached out to me,
Mhm.
is Gen Z. She's like 26. She's fantastic, by the way. And when, and throughout the interview process, at one point she said to me, so here's how it's going to work best. I mean, how do I need to work with you to make your job better, easier? She goes, it would be better for me, instead of talking on the phone, for you to send me voice memos via text. And that's what I do. Nothing I'd ever done
Right.
before, because I hadn't had any Gen Zs working for me.
Mhm.
But I learned to do that. It's what she needed. It's what we do. Now, that doesn't mean we never get on the phone, because we do.
Mhm.
But generally it's just through voice memos on text. That's what works for her.
Yeah.
That's what makes me, for her, a good leader. I'm able to communicate in a way it works for her. So anybody's a great leader. It's not incumbent upon her as the employee to figure out how to communicate with me. Although if she were to do that, she'd get bonus points. I recently did discovery in the spring with an organization who 2 subordinates to executive team members, I interviewed them as well, said to me they had to adjust how they communicated because their boss wouldn't do it. Now, they get major points for doing that, but shame on their
Mhm.
bosses. And I wrote that in my report. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
not what a great leader does.
Yeah.
That's part of your development. Communication is a piece of development.
Well, let me steal something that comes right out at the outset of your book. You're like, thanks very much for the everybody on the bus metaphor, but it doesn't really work for me. The concept of a bunch of passive, folks bouncing along the road, and you like sweep rowers, and it's an I really like to dig into word choices that people use and metaphors that people use.
Yeah.
You were talking about the fact that a sweep rower rows one side and another side, so you need a complementary left-right combination. Am I getting that right? Yeah.
Well, sweep rower has two hands, one oar.
Right. An oar just headed out one side of the boat.
Yes, correct. One side. Yeah. Gotcha. Yep.
And that's kind of like, okay, well, if you're all on one side of the boat, you're gonna be doing a tight turn. But there is something to this, like old folks, young folks. The reason why I care about that, because I like how people teach and learn. Well, it tends to be that old experienced people teach young inexperienced people. But you were just giving these lovely examples where it's like, who's going to learn from who's going to make the adjustment, right? So when you say that, I might be taking liberties with your metaphor, and you don't mean it this way, but when you say that, I kind of think like you get this beautiful harmony of a left side, old folks in their old-fashioned ways with their go see people for long lunches nonsense, young folks with their new-fashioned ways of like, send me a voice memo, and so on. But boy, if you can get alignment on the two of them, or say synchronicity with the two of them. Am I abusing your metaphor and that's not the way?
No, I mean, you're right. It's not, old timers like me, we better listen. I have a lot to teach. Okay. Every time I get an email about somebody who says, because they think I'm a recruiter still. So they send me, spammy emails about some great new thing that's going to solve all my problems.
Right.
Ain't going to happen. Technology is not a panacea for your problem. It is a tool to help you do your job better. Period.
Yeah.
Oracle, back in the day when they were nothing more than a relational database company, all the old folks will know that, right? If you don't know what to do with a database, it's worthless. LinkedIn, perfect example. I see LinkedIn as a massive database that, yet Microsoft's coming in and ruining yet another company, right? But it's a massive database that if you don't know what to do with it or how to use it properly, it's not going to work for you. How do I know this? Because I get crap from people all the time on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I get connection requests. More, right? What?
More and more, like more.
Oh, I just agitate.
24 months ago, surely.
It's horrible. And again, I blame Microsoft. They've really ruined what was a really fantastic platform. When I joined LinkedIn, it was in 2004. That was, I think it was 6 months after they launced. I was, member like 500.
There was like 80 guys on there.
Yeah, right. And I was one of them. And I remember this buddy of mine told me, he just finished reading my book, and he's the one who told me about LinkedIn back in 2004. And he said, it's this really great new business network, blah, blah, blah. And I was member 554 something thousand, right? I was within that, just over that first, under that first million. And back in those days, here's what they said: only accept connection requests from people you know. Now, if you weren't on LinkedIn back then, you wouldn't know that. The amount of connection requests I get now on LinkedIn with not even a message, delete. And I ignore them and I say, I don't know this person. Always. Now, I also get a lot, and this is sort of the typical, hi, I hope you're doing well. Okay, you don't know me. Stop asking me that. I get emails that start out that way. I'm like, okay, you know what? When I interviewed Seth Levine, he's a venture capitalist here in Boulder, for my podcast, we started grousing about that, about how people that don't even know you start out by asking you, hi, I hope you're doing well. I'm like, you don't know me. Why are you asking me that question? It's like when a salesperson calls you on the phone, how are you?
You're your hope on cheap stuff, friend.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Hope is not an effective strategy. So, and then they launch into, hi, I'd really love to get to know you. I see you're really an expert in your business. And I'm just thinking, okay, stop blowing sunshine up my skirt. This is a form letter. You tell everybody this, and you're hoping maybe I'll be stupid enough to think, oh, I'm so flattered. Right. So anyway, that's, and I just delete all those as well. I'm just like, come on, come up with something better.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you've been on one of the things that I really love, so you wouldn't have had to tell me that you spent a lot of time selling, for me to intuit that. But one of the things I really love is when people have been on one side or another of a transaction a lot, they really know how to play the other side. So when you're being sold to, what I've noticed is people who have sold a lot, when they're being sold to, they're not merciless. In fact, they can be quite helpful and congenial and amicable.
Yeah.
But they won't suffer fools because they're just over it, right? They respect, it's like you respect a fellow martial artist or a fellow craftsman. You're like, okay, look, if you do this right, we will definitely have a good little dance together. And if you don't, it's very over very quickly.
That's right. Yeah. And I have just, on an occasion, I'll respond to somebody, but very infrequently. I just, and give them a little bit of advice. Oh, by the way, this is not how to sell. I mean, very rarely do I do it because I don't want to waste my time and I don't have the time. But I just am trying to figure out who in the world. It's the same thing as those internal recruiters. They hire some kid and they say, here, send out this message. And I'm like, who taught you? This is not how to sell.
Yeah.
And again, I blame the internet for that. People have gotten lazy. And there is no, like I said, there's no cheap fix. There's no one panacea, even though a company might want to get you to think that they are a panacea for your recruiting. Oh, we can do this. And I often will respond and go, honey, I'm a professional headhunter with over 3 decades experience. This will not work. This will not work.
Yeah. I can save you and me some time here on this.
This will not work. Who's going to buy you? Some idiot who thinks that there is a panacea out there. So you'll sell it, you'll make some money, and then it's not going to make a lick of difference for them.
Yes. Carol, let's talk for a little bit because we don't have a ton of time left. And I especially want to talk to you about retention / leaving. Right. And I'll put it to you as a double. Being aware of which employees are at risk of leaving. You have some interesting notes there. I'm very interested in this topic. I'm interested almost from like an animal instinct level, because anybody who's managed for a while is like, I should have known. And then they develop a bit of an eye, and it's never a hard science. There's always something a little vague in it, but there's something to it. And you discuss it a bit. When I read it in your book, I thought, you know what? She has cut what could have been like another chapter here and decided to give us a couple of sentences, but there's more there. So bookmark that. There's one is tell me more about employees at risk of leaving. And then you said another thing, which was counteroffers in general don't really work.
Oh yeah.
And that I don't know about. That isn't something that was new to me, but kind of interesting and compelling. So can I give you a double?
Yeah. I'm going to answer the second one first.
Okay.
So counter offers, you know anything about basketball?
Sure. Something.
Okay. So counter offers are like a full court press. Okay. You put a lot of pressure on somebody. And when I say somebody, I mean your employer. And full court press to the person with the ball. How does that feel to them? No, like they're getting pressure. That's the whole point, full court pressure, right? So when somebody gives notice and you as the employer comes back and says, oh shit, we have to fix this. And you give them a counter offer and they entertain it. First of all, there's 2 things. One, you should not have to put a full court press on somebody to give them more money or development or whatever the reason is that you're leaving, right? Could be a number of things. if I was worth that now, I was worth it 5 minutes ago before I had to tell you, and now there's a full court press and you're thinking, oh God, I have to fix this.
Mhm.
That's the first thing. Why am I worth it now when I wasn't worth it then? Okay.
Mhm.
The second thing is you now are a fidelity risk. Meaning quit once, you'll do it again. So maybe layoffs come around and they're thinking, well, we got to lay somebody off. We really like this guy, but he's already quit once anyway. So maybe we'll, try to quit once. Maybe we'll just lay him off or her. Right. So that's the reason that I'm not a fan. This is one of the first things I learned back in the early 90s in recruiting. And here's the problem. I had a client call me once. Hadn't done any work for them in a while because, like many startups, they want to do everything themselves. Okay. Well, let's see how well that works for you. They're not professional headhunters. It would just be like me saying, I can do your job, Mr. Head of Sales. No, I can't. I know a lot about sales because I've been in sales. Doesn't mean I can do your job. Everybody thinks they can do my job. And I believe the reason for that is because there's so many bad headhunters out there, recruiters. There's not really real professional. There's not really many professional headhunters anymore.
The comparison has been said.
Right. Yeah. So he called me up and he said, we had these 3 great people. All of them turned down our offer. We need some help. And I know exactly why they turned down the offer, because they were never qualified. I mean, how does a sales professional not qualify people in the recruiting process? Because they don't understand recruiting, right? It's just different. Human beings are different in that way, what drives them. And as whoever the headhunter is, if you do not have, I was always qualifying people along. Are you going to get a counteroffer? Do you expect a counteroffer from your company? No, they never give counteroffers. Okay. What if they do? Rather than saying, okay, great. I guess we don't need to talk about a counteroffer.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, what if they do? Well, I'm not going to take the job. Why not? I need to be convinced that no matter what happens, if they get a counteroffer, they ain't accepting it. Because if I have any inkling of them accepting a counteroffer or not accepting the job, I will never have my client produce an offer.
Mm-hmm.
I had one guy years ago when I was still in contingent recruiting. This might've been in the 90s. Or maybe, probably in the 90s, late 90s, say to me, I was getting ready to get him. I'm going to try to collect all these offers and then decide. I said, no, I'm not giving you an offer. I'm not going to have them give you an offer. Even on contingency, I knew enough to say that then we're not going to produce an offer for you. You go through the offers, you decide which one you want. If it turns out that you decide you want this one, then and only then will we give you an offer. Why would I waste my time or their time and money? And that's what this client of mine, that's what had happened. They were all great candidates too. Couldn't close any of them. And not because they hadn't gotten counteroffers, they just really hadn't qualified all the way through.
Yeah.
Does that answer the first question? Or the second question first?
It answers the second question first.
Okay. So retention, remind me exactly what the question was on that one again, please.
Being aware of which employees are at risk of leaving.
Yeah. So this is having a culture of feedback, Kevin. If you have a culture of feedback, which I talk a lot about in the book, that means anyone at any level can talk to anybody else at any level without risk of getting thrown under a bus. There was a good bus. There's the analogy we'll use for the bus.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where the bus analogy works.
The bus, yes, it's the thing that it's the thing that goes over victims.
It's going to drive over you and doesn't even, oh gosh, we just must have hit a rock in the road. No, that was a person. So that culture of feedback. Now you have to teach people how to communicate. That's part of communication, and teaching somebody how to go to their manager or 2 levels above or wherever they are. And it doesn't mean you should skip levels. This is, I think, a longer conversation, but so I'll shorten it. But if you go to your manager and know how to speak to that person and they're given the time and you can't get where you need to go, then and only then should you jump a level above them. In a culture of feedback, you really should never have to do that.
Right.
Because your leaders are trained properly. They know how to communicate. You have to really be committed to having your subordinates, and that goes all the way up the food chain to the CEO, to your subordinates coming to you. And for the CEO, that means the board or an outside consultant gives them the feedback, right?
Mhm.
But you have to be committed to anybody that's subordinate or to the side of you, giving you feedback as a contribution to making you a better leader or a better
Mhm.
employee or whatever that might be. So, assuming you have a culture of feedback, your employees should feel free to come to you when they're at risk.
I
Okay.
see.
Now, if you don't have a full culture of feedback, or this particular leader doesn't have a culture of feedback in their organization, then you got a problem, right? So ultimately, you better be sitting down with your people in one-on-ones at a minimum of every quarter.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to check in with you, make sure everything's going okay. If it's not, I want you to tell me. In a culture of feedback, that works because they will tell you. Hopefully they'll have come to you already. But if they haven't, you still need to learn how to know how to communicate to them that I want to hear from you. I don't care if it's negative. I can't fix it unless I know.
Mhm.
That is how now it's not 100%. Nothing is 100%.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell anybody that, oh yeah, once I fix your problems, you'll never have another problem again, because it's just not how human beings work. There's always that one thing.
But it's a real heartbreaker.
Yeah.
It's a real heartbreaker. I've seen this a lot, and people, leaders ask for training as sort of a salve on the wound. It's too late
No.
at that point.
Yep.
But it's a heartbreaker when somebody goes, because once you're already in the conversation about like trying to cling to them, and they're solving the problem by saying, I gotta go, that, the horse is bolted. You like rushing to shut the gate
Yeah.
is
Horse is out of the
like
barn.
not,
Mhm.
yeah, it's not good, and it feels really bad.
Yeah.
But it does happen. So I think there's a real premium if I can give you a nudge as to something that I see. I have a different lens on a different set
Mhm.
of organizations and in different geographies, but
Right.
of the various things that you touch on where I think, oh man, I'd love to hear more from Carol on this, I think that's one where there's real pain at the leadership level. It's almost sadness, to be honest. I don't think it's like stinging pain. It's like a dull kind of ache for leaders. Is like, I wish that I could see when somebody is at risk, at least a couple of, meters in front of me, rather than, they've come to
Mhm.
me on a Friday saying, hey, boss, can I
I'm
get
out.
half an hour? You're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're done.
Yeah. Well, it really takes commitment
Fast Company needs an article from you on that. When you get time. I know you got stuff cooking, but I think if based on the thing, what you're talking about, finding a milieu. It's like an environment in which people, younger folks in particular, understand the expectation is that you bring some negative news to me so that I can do something about it.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that.
That
We
isn't,
talk,
by the way, where I thought you would go with it. But so I'm glad I asked you so that I could hear that, because it wasn't what I might have guessed.
why, what did you think I was going to say?
Oh, what's the name of your cat?
Oh, January.
Wow, that's
Did you hear
another
her
line.
meowing? Is that why?
No, I saw her ear.
You saw her ear. Yeah. 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 She has a habit of, whenever they're winter tail. Whenever I am on a interview or on a phone, that she manages to jump up here and, have to be the center of
Good for
attention.
her. They have
As you can
a
see.
homing instinct.
She probably just woke up she probably just came in from outside and, has to let me know she's in the house, and, now
Yeah.
she's going away.
Well, we've done about like
Yeah.
60, 65
Yeah.
of these or so, and we have a short collection of pets, of pet involvement. So
Yeah, I'm
you're
sure
in
you
good
do.
company.
So finish what you were saying about what you expected me to say. about that.
I thought you were going to talk about behavioral cues, like, somebody starts showing up like dressed a little better than they usually do, or
Well,
dressed a little sloppier than they usually do.
Yeah.
And, just sort of like cold reading the behavior off a baseline and being like, that's a sure sign.
Well, you're right. That is. I'm just, I mean, I don't talk about that in the book, but those are things that, back in the day when I'd send people on interviews, face-to-face interviews when we still had them, we were in the same room. Somebody'd be like, I've got to go on a certain day because that's our dress up day, or I've got to go on a certain day because that's our dress down day, or I've got to go home and change first before I go to the interview. Because if I come into the office in a suit back then, back in the day, people would wear suits to interviews often, especially salespeople, right? Then that's going to raise a huge red flag. So you're right about that. I just didn't, that wasn't one of the things I was talking about. That's a cue. Yeah, you're right. That's a cue.
No, you went the direction you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing the time, Carol. We have to saw it off.
Okay.
But I don't like asking you like where people can find you and so on. You're easy to find. If somebody wants to find you, they can type there on their keyboard and they'll find you.
That's exactly right.
And that's the book for those who need to see it for a cue there, right? Powered by People. Great book. Just go get it.
Thank you.
What I'd prefer to ask you is, what kinds of engagements are you looking for? What kinds of engagements do you really like? Because that's more interesting. Like, let's not get people finding you who aren't really right for the kinds of folks you want to work with. But you said, for example, like CEOs who are already curious, who already get it. You've mentioned small, medium businesses and so forth. What are you really keen to do in terms of your writing, thinking, consulting, coaching?
So CEOs have to be curious. They have to be committed to, this may not be an easy fix. Like, you're not in and out in a month, Carol, because it's, my model's a land and expand model, right? As it often is. So I go in and I do discovery and I charge for that. And then they get a report, and this is what I recommend moving forward. If you want to do that, fantastic. This is what it looks like. And then once that's on its way, then the, part 3 of the model is, I'm going to build your talent strategy and train all your people, teach you how to hire recruiters, what to ask, if you're in the position to needing a full-time headhunter, let's look for that person who's going to be your chief talent officer, reporting directly to you. Okay. You're going to have to pay that person. Now, some people will go to work for a little bit less money because, this is what they're committed to, rather than being out on their own anymore, whatever that might be. So, again, they need to be curious. They need to they need to be committed to what they're going to hear back. And they need to want to know, what is it? I'm using the word want when I should be saying committed, because those are two different things. They need to be committed to actually hearing what you're going to tell them, what I'm going to tell them, when it may not be something that they're particularly happy about. Could be negative, right? So, and they have to understand, like I said, this is not going to be an overnight fix. It could take 6 months. It could take longer, depending on the size of the company and, what kind of shape they're in. Project is usually going to take between, I'd say all in all 3 pieces, 3 to 6 months. And that may mean and it may mean that you're giving your leaders consistent coaching and training, right? So, to help them be better leaders, whether some of it's going to be individual, some of it's going to be group, because it makes sense to do so. Do small cohorts with your people. Did I answer your question? You bet.
I think
I'm industry agnostic.
Based on your description, those people will know themselves. That they can kind of opt in and opt out pretty easily off of that.
Yeah, it's not there. Again, as I talk about panaceas, There is not a panacea to this problem. There are people out there doing leadership training saying this is going to fix your company. Again, I call bullshit on that.
Yeah.
Not going to fix your company. These are all pieces of problems, and you need to fix the thing as a whole. And there's things that I don't do. I bring in other experts to do those pieces. I'm not, you know.
I live in Singapore. I'm in Brunei today, but I live in Singapore, and we start a lot of our initial consultations, and in one of our pitch decks, there's a quote from the sort of founder of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, said, "I never met a man who became a leader as a result of attending a leadership conference." It's such a great quote. I mean, it particularly works because that's the equivalent here in Singapore of like a George Washington quote, right? In the US, because he's the founder. But it's like such a nice little truism. Carol, it's just super. Thanks for taking the time and the energy to write a book. I thank almost every author with that, but I actually mean it each time. You didn't have to do that. You could have just, kept on cranking away at your work and making some money and like loving it. But you took the time, and it is real sweat to put this down. And thanks for giving us an hour to embellish things that are really valuable in there.
My pleasure. It was good to be with you, Kevin. Thank you.